Begin the current Daf Mesech Kidushin Daf Ayin Gimel. Begin on the bottom of Ayin Beis and Beis, 3 lines up at the bottom of the Yamud. But the Gemara introduced a brisa that relates back to the halacha of the Mishnah. That is the Mishnah we spoke about as the title of this parak is Asar Yuchsin, 10 levels of yichus that was brought up by Ezra from Babel to Yisrael. And one of the categories that we spoke about, not every one of these 10 were able to marry from one to the other, but there was one category of Geiri, Charori, Mamzedi. We said the Mutaran Zebazeh, which that the Gemara is actually going to bring a machlokes regarding our Geirim allowed to marry Mamzerim. The Gemara is going to explain the source for that machlokes. Ashir, because it's close to the Kalsim and Cheskel, turn to Daf Chaim, Bishop doing today's Daf, should be a schos v'achin b'nei Yisrael, and Eretz Yisrael throughout the world. Something that's discussed in today's Daf, like we said, is the machlokes regarding Ger Noisim Mamzeres. Could a Ger, who is a regular Jew, just not FFB, could he marry a Mamzeres who is Asalav Bakal? That's obviously related to the conversation. Is a ger considered kahal or not? The reason for the issue of shtuki and asufi, we spoke about in the Mishnah, there's a shtuki where we say quiet when he says tati, because we don't know who his father is. A sufi was gathered in from the street, we don't know who his mother and father is. What's really the reason why it's forbidden to marry a shtuki or a sufi? Some of the important terms of the concept of today's daf are the famous Talmudic principles of kol the parish, meruba parish. Whatever separates from something, if it moved, we go based on the laws of the majority, but kol kavu, whatever is stationary, we actually say no matter what the ratio is, we say we view it as if it's 50-50 that the circumstance in which a child is considered nasufi, what makes the child nasufi? If a child's lost for a few hours, what makes him nasufi? So kol zman shebeshuk of iman yamanim lav. As long as the child's still in the street, father and mother is believed to say that this is our child. Nesev min hashuk ein yamanim lav. Once he was already taken in from the street, then they're not trusted regarding his status anymore. So we begin the current Daf Ayin Beis, Amud Beis, 3 lines up at the bottom of the Yamud. As we mentioned, the Mishnah had said that Geirei, converts, Charude, freed slaves, Mamzerim, illegitimate children, Nisine, Shtuki, Asufi, we said, Kulam Materm Labazabazah, they're all allowed to marry each other. That's what the Gemara introduces now. Turn about a brisa. That's actually machlokes regarding one of them. Ger noisei mamzeres divrei Rabbi Yesi. Rabbi Yesi holds that a ger, someone who converted to Judaism, can marry someone that was born from a relationship that was a chiva krisis. Someone went and got married to his aunt or someone that's forbidden. Why is he allowed to marry mamzeres? Because he holds that the kahal of gerim, the assembly, the populace of the converts, are not called kahal. So though the Torah tells us, Lo yav mamzer b'kal Hashem, a mamzer is not allowed to marry into the Jewish people, that's kahal. As the Gemara is going to explain, Gerim are not called kahal, they're Jewish, but not kahal, and therefore Ger could marry mamzeres. However, Yehuda says, no, Ger lo yisa mamzeres. A Ger cannot marry mamzeres because he holds that the kahal of Gerim is called, quote unquote, kahal, and therefore mamzer cannot marry a Ger. Now, continues the brisa. Now, whether we're talking about a convert, whether we're talking about a freed slave, or v'chal, or someone that was born from a prohibited union of his father, meaning his father, let's say, married a grusha, so he's a chal. All these individuals are matorim bekehenis. They're all permitted regarding a kehenis. Now, what does that mean to say? What does it have to do with what we just said a moment ago? Even though kahanim are forbidden to marry a giyoris or meshuchreres or halala, because as we'll explain shortly, but the point is that these women are forbidden. Halala says explicitly in the Torah, but the halacha is that kahanos are not warned to marry those that are puzzle. That like these individuals, that if the flip side, if they would be the women, then the men would be forbidden. In this case, that the men, the ger and the meshach and the chol, the women kohanes are not forbidden to marry those that are necessarily kosher to them to marry. You can even marry a puzzle. Okay, but first the Gemara explores the first part of this brisa, which relates to the halacha of the Mishnah. My time Rabbi Yesi, what's the reason Rabbi Yesi that he holds that kahal gerim is lo ikikal, and therefore ger can marry mamzeres? So the Gemara explains, Chamisha Kalik Sivi says 5 times in the Torah the word kahal when it talks about the prohibition about psula yuchasin. It says other times in the Torah kahal, but it talks about the prohibition of certain people to marry. it says by in Devarim Chav Gimel, it says Lo Yover Mamzer B'Kal Hashem, and it says further Lo Yover Eloi B'Kal Hashem. Then it says another time Lo Yover Amoini Ma'avi B'Kal, and it also says further Lo Yover Lem B'Kal. So that's 2 times by Mamzer, 2 times by Amoni Ma'avi, where these are individuals who are not allowed to marry into the Jewish people. And then the 5th time it says Dor Shlishi Yover Lem B'Kal. And it talks about Mitzri Nadaimi, that you have to wait for the 3rd generation convert Mitzri Nadaimi. It says the word Kal over there. It says Rashi, it says another time Kal by Patsua Dakam. The man with crushed testicles is also not allowed to marry into the Jewish people. So it says Rashi, that's not from Psula Yuchasin. We're talking about Psula Yuchasin, which is that of the Yichus. Crushed testicle has nothing to do with Yichus. That's not why he's prohibited to marry into the killer, but 5 times it mentions by Psula Yuchasin. Okay, what are these 5 times saying killer coming to teach us? So that's what the Gemara says. That's the machlekes. Now, meaning, as first Rashi explains at the top of Ein Gimel and Aleph, said really you could have written all of these prohibitions in one shot and said one time the word kahal. You could have said lo yove mamzer amoyne ma'avi bekal gam derasiri lo yove lehem boy ad oilam, and by mitzi and adomi you could have just written der shlishi yove lehem. Why does it have to say the word kahal all these times? So that the Gemara darshans the 5 times of saying kahal. What's the 5 times? Okay. Chad lekahanim wants to say that these individuals, these psuli yichus, cannot marry kahanim. Number 2, b'chad levim, that you're forbidden to levim. Number 3, b'chad Yisraelim, because as Rashi explains, had you said it only one time, you would have thought to say that the psuli yichus are forbidden to kahanim, which we know kahanim are more restricted in regarding who they're allowed to marry. But Levim would be permitted. If it would have said 2 times, I would have thought to say Levim and Kahanim. But Yisraelim would be permitted. So that's the 3 times of Kahal. Then number 4 is V'chad is Lemishri Mamzer B'Shetuki. So this is a little bit like Halt Cup. It's a little bit of a more complex daf in the explanations, that to permit a Mamzer B'Shetuki, meaning even though the Mamzer is definitely, we know that his father and mother were prohibited based on karas to marry each other. The shtuki, as we explained already, is a suffix. We don't know who the father was, but not necessarily was a prohibited person. It's a suffix mamzer. So the chiddush is we're not concerned that maybe the shtuki is kosher, and if he's kosher, it's forbidden to marry a mamzeres, because that's the drasha that we darshan, that when it says kahal, it's a definite kahal that a mamzer cannot marry. But a kahal suffix, like a shtuki, that you could marry. That's what another time the word kal comes to teach you. Let's say it says Loyomi mamzer b'kal Hashem. And b'kal, a definite kal. But a suffix kal, like a shtuki, that might not be a kosher person, might be a mamzer mamzeres, then you're allowed to marry. That's the 4th time it says kal. And number 5 is chad l'misha shtuki b'Yisrael. So he plays on both teams. That the drasha is the other way, which is that only a mamzer vadai is not like b'kal Hashem, but a mamzer suffix, which is what a shtuki is, could come b'kal Hashem. And we'll see in a moment that actually seemingly would not need a separate kahal, but that's how the Gemara is understanding right now. The Mishnah said a shtuki is puzzled to marry. They're only permitted to marry Gedi, Charori, they're not permitted to marry b'kal Hashem. So that, as the Gemara is going to tell us later on, that's only for rabbinic law, because he might marry his paternal sister, because we don't know who his father is. You can't just marry any girl, because she might be your sister from your father, because you don't know who your father is. That's why. But biblically, the 5th time it says the word kahal is coming to teach you that the shtuki is permitted to marry into a Yisrael, which Taisus asks. He says, "Hey, shtuki b'Yisrael mitur dekal." Where do you see that? You don't really see that from the word kahal. Where do you see that a shtuki is permitted based on that? The 4th drasha makes sense, that kal vada is like a mamzer. Kal suffix, let's say shtuki, a mamzer is allowed to marry. Where do you see from the 5th time the word kahal that allows a shtuki b'Yisrael? So he says that you compare mamzer to kahal, just like by kahal you b'mayit kal suffix. So by mamzer we b'mayit mamzer suffix. So it's an interesting shot the way Taisus says it. But upon him, that's what the word kal has been compared to mamzer, and al kaponim, we see that a shtuki would be permitted to marry a Yisrael. Now, but the main point is that we used up all the 5 terms of kahal for these drushes. So that leaves us kal gam like kahal, because we don't have an extra word kahal to include. There's someone else included in kahal, which would be the gerim. So gerim are not being included, so we're left with gerim not being considered kahal. If they're not kahal, a mamzer is allowed to marry. A ger can marry mamzeres. He did, so there's no isser of a ger to marry. It doesn't say lo yovi ger b'kal Hashem. They're allowed to marry regularly so, but they're also allowed to marry mamzeres because there's no isser. The old isser is lo yovi mamzer, lo yovi amoni mabi b'kal Hashem. They're not considered as kahal. Right. That's right, but that's one right. One way of looking at it is saying that okay, we're not sure. Maybe it's this way. On the other hand, another way of saying it is that only Vadai has this halacha. Lo'yava mamzer b'kal Hashem is only in the Vadai kahal, but a Safek kahal you're allowed to. And then you say that we compare kahal to mamzer, like the Ritaysa says. So we say that only Vadai mamzer is asa b'kal Hashem, but a Safek mamzer is mutter b'kal Hashem. Yeah, so I mean it's more drashadik than svaradik, because svaradik would be contradictory which one it is. That's all Rabbi Yossi. Now, and that says the Gemara, but Rabbi Yehuda, he says no. He says kahanim leviyim mechad kal nafka. He said kal leviyim are one shevet. Like Rashi says, it's not logical to call kahal a half a shevet. In other words, you're saying lo yavi. If it would have said one time the word kahal, let's say lo yavi mamzu kal Hashem, you would have said, oh, my mind kahanim nish leviyim. They're from the same shevet. It's not mistaber. So ayata le lekal geirim. So then you have an extra kal because you're not needing one for kal, one leviyim. So that extra kal is going to tell you who we include from kal. Geirim are called kal, and therefore they're not allowed to marry mamzeres. That's one pshat. Or v'bayisem, if you want, you could say another pshat that no, you're right. It's true. For kal leviyim, you need to say the word kal 2 times to darshan. Even so, I'm going to find you an extra kal to include geirim. You know why? Because mamzer b'shtuki b'Yisrael, those last 2 drashas we had said, that a mamzer is allowed to marry a shtuki, and the shtuki is allowed to marry Yisrael, which the shtuki is playing both sides of the team, michad kal nafka. That's learned that from one word of kal, because from that kal we say it has to be vadei kal, and it's teaching us that the mamzer also has to be vadei. So we darshan like this. The pasuk says in the Varim, lo yovim mamzer b'kal Hashem, a mamzer should not come into the kal of Hashem, which teaches us, and this is really what Tez was saying before, that it's really one thing. Mamzer vadehu de lo yavai is telling us a definite mamzer could not come into the Kalal Yisrael. A mamzer suffix, which is what a shtuki is. Yavai, that's the heter that a shtuki can marry Yisrael. And at the same time, b'kal vadehu de lo yavai, the mamzer only cannot marry a definite kil, a definite Yisrael. Habakal suffix yavai, but a suffix kal, which is what a shtuki is, could marry. So it's only that a mamzer vadei cannot marry into kahal vadei, but a mamzer suffix could marry into kahal Yisrael, or a mamzer vadei could marry into kahal suffix. So that's the one source, the one kahal will teach me the shtuki both ways, that he's permitted in the mamzer and he's permitted in the kahal Yisrael. So I have an extra kahal. I don't have to use the kahal of that I thought 2 kahals for the 2 drashas of shtuki. No, only need one. And therefore, I have an extra one to teach you. Kal gerim ikri kahal. That's a second source. Or if I can give you a third shot. No, hani nami trei calling in. You're right that for those 2 drashas, I would need 2 different psukim. And if I did not have an extra pasuk, I would not have darshaned that a mamzer vadai is the one who cannot marry in, but that a suffix mamzer could. Rather, this is really the point that you were bringing out before. If you're going based on Sarah, that I would have said, no, it's like all other sveki isser, that on what's definite, you're warned that if you violate, you'll get malchus, but when it's a suffix, of course, suffix derais l'chumah, you would say that a shtuki cannot marry into klal Yisrael, because when it says la yev mamzer b'kal Hashem, is okay if you're a suffix mamzer, so you have a suffix derais, so you wouldn't be able to marry in. So this third pshat of the Gemara for Rabbi Yehuda is saying, yes, of course I do need both drashas, 2 times kahal, not 1 time kahal, to tell you the drasha that a shtuk is permitted to marry the klai. So then we're back to the question. You already used up all 5. So at the time of Rabbi Yehuda, what's the source of Rabbi Yehuda that he says that kal gerim ikri kal? Where does he have that source? It says hakol, says chuka achas lochem. The assembly of the Jewish people, 1 statute is for you, v'lagir hagor, and for the convert that lives with you. Now, why does it have to say the word kal over here? Rather, it's coming to tell you that the ger is going on the word kal to tell you that it's cool, kal. And therefore, that's his source from a different pasuk. It says the Gemara, Rabbi Yosi, he says, no, chuka achas hifsik inyan. It says the word kal, then it interrupts with the word chuka achas, and then says the word ger. Obviously, then ger is not going back on kahal, and that's al kapanim, the machlekes we had regarding if a ger can marry mamzeres or not, was if kal ger mikal, which is mentioned many times in Shas. This is the source that we have an extra word kal to teach you gerim ikikal, or no, we already maxed out, and therefore we don't know the halacha of a ger, and therefore they're not kal, and therefore they could marry mamzeres. Now going back to that brisa, the second half had. Yeah. You want to say that should compare, but it doesn't say kahal over there. But you're saying it's like kachem, meaning, yeah, that's for the halachas, whatever, right? But it won't be considered necessarily kahal. The second half of the brisa said, okay, but echad ger ve'echad, it's like really contrasting. I mean, although I'm telling you that we have a machlekes regarding if a ger can marry a mamzeres or not, regarding kal Hashem, this prohibited psula yichus. But one thing I'll tell you that by females it's different. Echad ger ve'echad ev meshucher b'cholol, whether it's a convert or a freed slave or a cholol, that although, let's say, a kohen would be forbidden to marry those in the female version, but the men, mutar mekanis, again, this is allowed to marry those men. What's the source of this? So the Gemara says, Masayil l'Rav. This supports Rav. Because I'm going to read the Rav. It says, Lehuzuru kisheros. The kahanois that are kosher are not warned lehinase lebsulim to marry the men that are pesule kahuna, which is a ger, a chalal, and an even meshurcher, because a kohen is prohibited to marry the daughter of these men, but the women are not prohibited to marry those men. Now, but says Rashi, for psulin, that the men that are puzzle, they are prohibited to marry them. For example, let's say a mamzer or a nasan. Women are prohibited on that also, because the Torah compares all isurim in the Torah, all unshim, a man to a woman. As the Gemara says, nivamas na pedal mabes. Here, when we're saying linas l'psulim, we don't mean all psulim. We don't mean a woman is allowed to marry a mamzer and nasan. We don't mean that. We mean say pesule kahuna, that a woman is allowed to marry, versus what a man would be prohibited on the woman's side. Now, the Gemara brings regarding this machlekes that we said, if a ger is allowed to marry a mamzer, says the Gemara, so meaning going back to the first half of the brisa that we were discussing. The Gemara just clarified the second half of the brisa, but now really going back to the first half of the brisa. Darshan the mecheza ger mutta b'mamzeres, meaning he darshan like Rabbi Yosi, that a ger is not called kahal, so he's permitted to marry mamzeres. But this was in mecheza. So everyone stoned him with their esrogim. Why? Because Rashi says there were many converts over there. That community was gerim, and they found it difficult that he's telling them that they're not called Kal Hashem, and that's why they're permitted to marry mamzeres. So they stoned him with esrogim. Interesting, why esrogim? Was it Sukkot time or was it alluding to something? But they stoned him with the esrogim. So Amar Rava said, "Mika de Dorish Milsik. Is it someone that's going to give such a drasha beduchte de shchichi gieda in the place where you find gerim? You got to know your crowd. You know, you don't get up there and say something that what they're not going to be so pleased about. Now, Darish Rava b'machayza, Rava darshan the machayza, ger mutta b'kehenes. So he gets up there in the same place, machayza, where there's a lot of gerim, and he says a ger is a lot of marry kehenes. Now, of course, a ger can marry kehenes, which is the halacha we just said before, because they're not is psulik kal, and more than that is that even though a man kohen would be forbidden to marry giyaris, but like we said, the second half of the brisa says But a ger is allowed to marry kahanis. So te'unu b'shiroi. So they covered him with silk. They give him not shine the pelts, whatever this and that. They're all excited that they tell him, the gerim, you can marry a bas kohen. Now, but then he went and he darshaned again, but ger muter b'mamzeres. Then he says, Zel b'shir, the next shir, they say, the ger is permitted to marry mamzeres. So Amrullah, they said to him, you ruined the first one. We were excited what you said before, but now you tell us we're not considered kal, and that and therefore we can marry mamzeres. So Amrullah said to them, what do you mean? He says, I did better for you. I told you, if you want, you can marry kahanis. And if you want, you can marry mamzeres. I opened up more doors for you. Why are you guys so upset at what I'm darshaning? Says Gemara, the Gemara concludes, the is ger muter b'kahanis u'muter b'mamzeres. It's taka both ways, like Rabbi said. And ger is muter b'kahanis, that we said, everyone agrees. And muter b'mamzeres, because, as the Gemara explains, muter b'kahanis, the kosher, the women kahanis are not permitted to marry psule kuhuna, which is what a ger is. And the reason why he's permitted to marry a mamzeres the ger is because Rabbi Yossi, who says they're not considered kahal Hashem, so it's not a problem. It's not like something flawed with them. It's just you don't have the isser lo yavei mamzer b'kal Hashem if you can marry a ger. Now the Mishnah continued and said, Elu hein shtuki. So we said, what's a shtuki that we silence him? It's called shemaker. Is if we recognize his mother, we don't recognize his father, so that's someone that's called a shtuki. Now Sufi, we say is nesev menashuk. We don't know who his father is nor his mother is. So the Gemara brings to qualify the halacha of the Mishnah that these individuals are forbidden to marry into Klal Yisrael. We said the shtuki and the Sufi and the Geri, they're allowed to intermarry, but Kahanim, Levim, Yisraelim, the Kal Hashem, they're not allowed to marry. So what's the reason? So actually the Gemara explains it's not so simple. Amar Rabbi said, Dvat Torah from biblical law, shtuki kosher. The shtuki is actually permitted to marry the Kal Hashem. So the Gemara, my time, what's the reason? So the Gemara explains that since you know the mother was a single girl, so the halacha is that Raiv, most of the people in the world, are kasher metzla. They're valid to her, that the majority of the world is not mamzerim nor relatives, that the child from that man should be a mamzer. And even if it's a non-Jew, which is the majority of the world, or a slave, if they have relations with her and that's how she got this child, that would not make the child a mamzer. The child would still be kosher. Okay, fine. Now, umiyut psul metzla. The minority are flawed for her, meaning if the man who had relations with her that seminated her was a mamzer or relative, okay, that would make the child a mamzer. But that's only minority. Now, moreover, the Gemara explains a little bit more detail. V'i azli inu ligaba. If with this intimacy, the man who had the relations went to her, which means that he moved from the place where he was stationary, so we shouldn't qualify this equation in the status of kavua, of stationary, which would make it 50-50. No, if the man went to her, then we could say the Talmudic principle, called the parish, miruba parish, whatever separated from the majority, and therefore we would presume the child would be kosher because the majority are those who would not make a mamzer. Okay, Mayam, what are you going to say? Why would you maybe come to invalidate it? Maybe she went to them. Okay, what would be the difference if the man went to the woman's apartment, the woman went to the man's apartment? What's the difference? No, there's a big difference in halacha. How about like kavua? That would make the man who's in the question over here about the status would be stationary. Now, halacha interestingly says, we don't care about metrics so much. We care about how did it happen. Was it parish? Then we'll go based on majority. Or was it kavu? Was it stationary? Then we consider mechsamach. We consider, I don't care if the majority is kosher, minority is puzzle. If it's stationary, you go 50-50. Okay, so now about Torah, the Torah says that you're not allowed to have a mamzer come b'kal Hashem. Now, that would be at most a suffix, even if you say 50-50. Now, that the Torah says, mamzer vadehu deloyave. As we darshan before, we said, the only one that's forbidden is a definite mamzer. A mamzer suffix ave. But a suffix mamzer is allowed to marry into Klal Yisrael. And the same thing we said is b'kal vadehu deloyave. It's only by a definite kal that the shtuki is not that the mom is not allowed to marry. But by a doubtful kal, like what a shtuki is, therefore we said that a shtuki really can marry both. He could bet for both teams. He can marry mamzer as mamzer, and he could also marry. She can marry into kahal. So wait a second, mata mam shtuki puzzle. Why did we say in the Mishnah that these individuals could only marry each other? Of Geri and Shechrudi and all these different individuals, Mamzer and Yisini and Shtuki and the Sufi. Why didn't we say a Shtuki can marry B'Kal Hashem? Says the Gemara, we're concerned, really biblically a Shtuki could marry because he's only a Safik Mamzer. And Safik Mamzer could come B'Kal Hashem. It's only a Mamzer Vadi cannot. But we don't know who his father is. How are you going to marry this Rachel that they read in your Mitruk Nashidduch? That saying, okay, Ashayna Shidduch, that Rachel's father might have been his father. So that's the reason why he cannot marry B'Kal Hashem. Simply because he might be marrying his paternal sister. He says, wait a second. That's the reason? Let me ask if that's the case, then Shtukis Le'yisa, you told me, okay, they can't marry B'Kal Hashem. Not because it's biblical, because Mam Zazava could biblically marry. Of us, the girl might be his sister. We don't know. Then why did you let a shtuki marry a shtukis? That girl who's a shtukis, but they don't know who her father is either, might have been the same father. So how you allowed to marry another shtukis? Okay, on that says the Gemara, Kol Hani Mizanu Va'azli. In other words, you think every be'ilois that we found that there was a woman who had out of wedlock relations was the same Johnny Appleseed, was the same father, to say every shtuki in town was the same man? It's not mistaber to say that every woman who we don't know who the father is the same one. Meaning a regular woman, you don't know, it's a subject derisa. She might be your paternal sister, but to think that the shtukis was your sister, because it might have been the same father, that the Gemara says is not so mistaber to think that was from the same father. But the Gemara still finds this difficult, because bas shtukis, meaning if let's say this daughter was born through a marriage, that her mother married someone that was permitted to her, lo yis mean the shtukis. If a shtukis, who, again, we don't know who her father is, but this shtukis, let's say, got married. She's allowed to get married to someone that's permitted to her. We said mamzeri, whatever the situation is. If a shtukis gets married and she has a daughter, lo yisa, a shtuki should not be able to marry the daughter of a shtukis. Why not? Shema, maybe he is the son of the shtukis, who that the shtuki had relations with the mother of this daughter, and then married the shtukis, was the other man. And the problem is, Shema says the Gemara, maybe Yisa Achoise Ma'aviv. He might be marrying his paternal sister for the same cause. So really the Gemara is concluding the question that says, Ella, why are you not concerned for this? Because lo shchicha, it's not common that he should be marrying his sister, or a shtuki itself is musad lo shchicha. And the musad lo shchicha legazav rabbanan, which Rashi says that's really the primary thing. So the Gemara is back to the question. It says, it's not so common, so therefore you shouldn't have made really this shtuki forbidden to marry a Jewish woman to think that maybe he's marrying his paternal sister, as if maybe the father of this upstanding citizen in the community might have been his father, to think that maybe it's his paternal sister. So basically the Gemara is proving that if you really were concerned for this, the shtuki would not be able to marry anyone, because anyone would always be concerned that this might be his paternal sister. So obviously there are cases that you're saying we're not concerned, this lo shchicha, so then also this should also be lo shchicha, which is also not common to think that this is going to be his paternal sister. So the Gemara concludes and says, you're right. These are not the reasons why. The reason is because elamala asa b'yuchsin. You're right. It's just a level of adherence that they made when it came to yichus, that they didn't want Safek Mamzerim getting married into Kalal Yisrael, but nothing because of a real legitimate concern of Issa Deraisa. There's no concern. We're not really concerned. But you find someone that Mevais Nishvez Antata is, we don't want that person marrying into Kalal Yisrael, and therefore that's a rabbinic milah that they made, but right, biblically there's no concern for the shtuki to marry into Kalal Yisrael. Now the Gemara has a similar conversation regarding the other category he spoke about. He says, biblical law, a Sufi kosher. A Sufi is, we don't recognize not his father, not his mother. And you'll say that maybe we should be concerned that maybe he's from an Ashes Ish, a married woman had relations with another man, because most of the men are puzzled to her. That you can't say. Says Gemara, my time, what's the reason? Because you can't say Ashes Ish, that we're talking about a married woman, because if she had given birth to a mamzer, she wouldn't have thrown him into the street, because she has a very easy way out. This is my husband. So when we find this child just laying there on the street somewhere, there's no reason for us to suspect that it's from a married woman, which most are puzzled by. Everyone besides her husband is actually forbidden to her. So you'd say, okay, most are puzzled. Then we should presume that this Asubi is a mamzer, and therefore, biblically, this Asubi should be forbidden to marry Kal Hashem. No, not true. Because if it was a married woman that this child came from, she would never have thrown him into the street. She could have just said it was from my husband. So Mayika. So what would you have presuming that to say that this child is a mamzer? You would say, okay, mi'it arusais. You have a minority.
Unless she knew it wasn't from her husband.
No, but she could always say it was from her husband.
But maybe she didn't want to cast that baby into mom's ears.
No, if I can. If she throws him into the street, now we're already thinking maybe he's a mamzer, because who would throw away a regular good child? But if she holds on to him, no one knows anything. So, if she really cares, she'll come forward and say I was mazan or whatever. But just to throw him into the street, that would only be if she would have no way of covering. So what are you saying? So there's a minority of women that are engaged, who obviously an engaged woman has no one to hang it on. She can't say it was my husband because she's not married yet. And then you have a minority of women that also would not have no one to blame it on because their husbands went overseas. So those would be individuals who would be problematic, but they wouldn't have anyone to blame it on. It says the Gemara, but there's also single girls who are kosher. Meaning we're trying to figure out the demographics over here. Who is this lady that threw this child into the street, which we don't know, obviously, the father, but we don't know who the mother is. Why would a woman take a child who, if she had a way to cover for him, she would cover for him. So she would never throw him into the street. She would just make believe it's her own child. There's certain women that can't cover. A single girl, hello? Where do you have a child from? So there's engaged women. There's women who the husband's overseas for 3 years. Sorry, it's obviously not from your husband. Your husband hasn't been in town for 3 years. And then there's single women. So there's all this, the minority are engaged. You have a minority that are, the husbands go overseas. But there's also single women, which would be something that would not be a mamzer. Because Roiv are kosher, as we said. And even if we said kavu, we said it's mechsa mechsa, we'd say safek mamzer would be okay. And there's also another variable of because of famine. Meaning there are certain women, they'll throw their children into the street, not because of mamzeres, simply because they have nothing to feed them. So essentially, of a palga, at least it's going to be 50-50, because it's a minority. Let's say we'll say 25% of engaged women, and let's say 25% of women that the husbands are overseas making money for the family. But then you have a huge chunk that are single girls, and then you have even married women that are not mazeres that would have thrown it, let's say, because of famine. So if I talk about it 50-50, Torah says, "Lo mamzer b'kal Hashem." A mamzer cannot become b'kal Hashem. That's only mamzer v'adu d'liyav, only devil mamzer. A mamzer savig yavi, but a savig mamzer could marry into the kal Hashem. And also b'kal v'adu d'liyav, it's only in the definite kal cannot marry. A b'kal savig yavi, but kal savig could come. So the question is, wait, why did they say as apostle? Didn't we just come out with the cheshbon to show that the Sufi should be kosher love b'kal Hashem. He's at most a Safik Mamzer, and Safik Mamzer is allowed to marry in. Says the Gemara, but Shemayisa Achayse Mi Aviv. We're concerned, the Gemara is going to go through the same shmooze it did by Shtuki. We're concerned that he might marry his paternal sister. Because, as Rashi explains, why not maternal sister? No, since we recognize the mother-in-law, she was Becheskes Kshera, we're not in doubt maybe she was Mizana to say that she would have thrown, that this was her son and she threw him into the street. Meaning, a man could go away one night and this might be his child. A woman can't go away one night and we think it's maybe her child. We see her for 9 months, and so we're not suspecting that this is his maternal sister, but it might be his paternal sister. So that's why rabbinically we don't let, or because of that concern, we don't let. But the Gemara says, wait a second, not if that's the case. You have the same question we had by the Shtuka, Asufis Laisa. Then the Sufi should not be able to marry the Asufis. Then he might be marrying his sister, both paternal or maternal. So the Gemara says, what? Kol Hani Shadi Vazli? You think every child that they had, they threw into the street, that we should presume that all those children we find in the street were the child of the same mother? And as Rashi explains, that to think that maybe it's from the same father, but from two different mothers, also not. As we said in the previous Gemara with the Shtuki, why you think every woman that was Mazana was from the same man? So the Gemara says, okay, but I have a question. Same type of question we had by the Shtuki, that he shouldn't be able to marry the daughter of an Asufi, because, again, depends on the gears that the Rashi has, but maybe the husband of the Asufis was his father. So Shemi Yisachaysa, he might be marrying his sister. So Ella, what are you telling me? That's so common that I shouldn't let an Asufi marry an Asufis because it might be the same father. So it's also not common to think that any woman that he's going to marry might be the father that was his father too. So the Gemara says, you're right, it's really not common, it's really not a concern. It's just an added level of stringency we made by the laws of Yichus, that we said that we're not going to let these flawed individuals marry into the regular Kila, but really biblically, Shtuki and Asufi really are permitted Lavoi, the Kal Hashem, because they're at the most a Mamzer Safik. I think Gemara qualifies, what is an Asufi? Amar Rava, Barav Huna, says, Motzi Mahal, if you find this baby with a circumcision, so as you continue to base, aim by Mishum Asufi, you're not going to qualify the child as an Asufi. So why? So Rashi explains, because if the child was not a kosher child, they would not have gone through the effort to circumcise him. This would have been a child that they would have just thrown away without ever having done a bris milah. So from the fact that they did one, must be some other reason why, but it's not because that the child is a mamzer. So too, mishalte hadame, if his limbs are straightened out and fixed, Ima Mishum Asufi will also not have the halacha of an Asufi, because if the child was a apostle, they would not have fixed him, because since she has an intention of throwing him away anyway, she would never have done that. Rather, it must be because of famine. They push out no way to feed him. They put him on the doorstep of some nice looking door with the big knocker over there that it has, some wealthy, the butler's going to open up soon and find the child. That's what they did. A different interesting pshat Rashi says is that Mishalte Adami means that his limbs are big and he looks robust, this child. So then must have been that the mother was not Mazana. Must have been from her husband, that through the tashmish that she always had, the child is healthy, as the Gemara says in Nidid of Laman Alf Man Aleph. The last 3 months of pregnancy, tashmish is yafal isha, the yafal vlad, and through that the vlad is mezuras and malubin, is a healthy child. So if you find a healthy child, must have been that was from the husband. It's an interesting pshat, but al kapam that would also make it's not an asufi. It was from the husband. Al kapanim. Another example is shoyif mishcha. If the baby was anointed with oil, and they put this type of medicine around his eyes or makeup to make him beautiful, or the mei chumri, if they have these knots they would tie on for medicinal reasons, they would hang on to the child, or tali piska, if they have a written amulet hanging from the child, and with tali kameya, or if you're hanging a different amulet with roots of herbs, all these Imba Mishum Asufi, that would obviously tell us that this child's not an Asufi, because she's obviously concerned for his life. And that proves that the beginning was that she loves him, and she wasn't throwing him to be to die. Must have been just people to find the baby and take him and take care of him. Now, totally bedikli, if the child was hanging from a tree, meaning obviously in a basket hanging from a tree, so imatile chaya. So it depends. If a child can reach a wild animal can reach the baby and snatch him and maul him from there, so yesh b'mishum asufi, that would qualify the baby as an asufi, because the rule is as follows: any place that you could understand that the intention of putting the baby there was that the baby should die, and she was not concerned for him, then that would have the lacha basufi. We're suspecting that this was from an unplanned pregnancy, one that was not really wanted to be. In love, if the wild animal cannot reach the baby, then then the child would not have halacha basufi. So to zaradsa, if the baby was hanging in the basket from a tree called zardasa, a sorb tree, so it depends. If it's michalamasa, if it was close to town, so even though a wild animal cannot reach it, yesh b'mishum asufi, it would have the halacha b'nasufi. Why? Why is that? So the Gemara Pesachim Daf Yomi from the base tells us that a sorb tree that's near town does not have less than 60 demons that hang around that tree. So therefore, obviously, it's a dangerous place, and if the mother put it there, that she obviously wants the baby not to survive, so that would give it a status of an asufi. But in lav, if it's not close to town, then the baby would not have the status of an asufi. So to be kinishta, when it's in a shul, smichta lamasa, near town, because their shuls they used to make out of town, and there's many people that are there because it's close to town, they would not have the halacha basufi, because obviously the mother knows that any second the guy's going to come machakava, come out from the mikveh, he's going to see this baby over there, and the baby's going to be taken care of. But v'mlav, if let's say it wasn't common for people to frequent the shul, for example, guests, so you have to be worried that there's going to be mazikim hanging around this shul that's far out that people don't usually go to, then yesh b'mishum asufi, then the baby would have the halachic status of an asufi. Omar Meimar, he says another case, he says, Hai Peter de Sufle. If you find the baby in a ditch, which is made to throw the date pits for animal food, yesh b'mishum asufi, that would have halacha of an asufi, because they used to do this out of the city, and there's again a lot of mazikim, they hang around these places that are not so like the haunted house idea, that they hang out places where it's not frequented by people. Charifta de nahara. If let's say the mother put the baby in the bowl, and she put him in the middle of the river, where the boats are constantly passing by the middle of the river, then aim by mishum asufi, because she knows that a sailor is going to find, the guys that are fishing are going to find the baby. But actually pishrei, but meaning the reason why she put him over there was because she wanted that they should see him. So therefore aim by mishum asufi. But pishrei, which is actually the slope of the river, which happens by the melting snow, where boats don't usually pass by over there, yesh b'mishum asufi, because again, she knows no one's going to find the baby over there, and therefore, again, it gives us this questionable status. The sides of the public domain, that's not going to have halacha b'nasufi, because she knows on the side of the roads where people walk and people find them. Middle of the street in Route 9, yesh b'mishum asufi, then it will have halacha of an asufi. People are going to trample the baby. Amar Rabba. Now Rabba says, I want to throw out a lot of this idea. He says, in a famine year, the child's not going to have halacha of an asufi. So the Gemara says, wait a second, which case is Rabba going on? If he's going the last case we just said, that in the middle of the street, you find the baby, the child's not going to have a halacha of an asufi in the famine year. What? I did the shnei oven cutlet. We think it's a famine year, they're going to kill him. You put him in the middle of the street, people trample. People think of Times Square, they're just going to trample the baby. No, but what are you saying? No, on the sides of the street. Well, and why are you saying in the famine? Yeah, even not in the famine, we said that the baby's not going to be nasufi on the sides of the streets. So says when did we say the teaching of Rav? On a different teaching. The Rav qualified, he said, as long as the baby's still in the street. So the father and the mother believed or trusted regarding the baby to say, "Oi, this is our baby. We were looking for him. We went shopping and we didn't in the shopping cart. And we didn't know where the baby was. This is our baby. Oy vey, shmalkala, whatever." Now, Nesem and Ashok, but if the baby was gathered from the street, they already brought him already to the station, this and that, and then ain't them on love. Then they're not trusted regarding him. Says in my white time, what's the reason? Rabbi says, since already the baby got a title of an asufi, gathered from the street that there was a baby that was found, that's it. Once he got the shame, he doesn't lose it anymore. We don't believe them to say, and therefore it already has the flaw of an asufi once already had the shame took effect. And that is what Ravi says, but oven in a famine year, where many babies are thrown out. The sages did not want to invalidate them all because of that. The word got out that they were asufi. So although he's gathered from the street, avim nemolav, there the rabbis did trust the parents that, okay, we believe that this is your child and that it was only done because of a famine. Now, a related idea regarding trusting who has the rights to say this child is a kosher child. So Rav Chizdi says, interesting halacha. He says, shloishin emanim la'alter. There are three individuals that are trusted immediately and not at a later time to say that the status of the child is kosher. But all those who are genuinely believed are believed even at a later point in time. These three only believed right away. They are a sufi, regarding the example of a gathered child from the street, chaya, a midwife, and a beteches chavrei seha, which one of the women, it wants to exempt the other women that were with her from the halach of tumah of nida, as we're going to explain later on. So the Gemara says, what are these three examples? So Sufis or Daman, we just said that when the child is gathered from the street, it's only right away before they took him out to the station. Second, that they gather him, we're not believing the parents anymore. What's the case of Chaya, of a midwife? The time like within the Brisa. Chaya in a menes loimer, a midwife is believed to say, Ze Yotzerishin. There's, let's say that twins, triplets, quads, whatever it was, that, and who's the first baby? The midwife is believed to say that this is the firstborn. And this one came out second. Now, but when do we say this? If she didn't leave the room and come back in. If you left the room and come back in and say, oh, yeah, this was the firstborn, she's not believed. We said there's only miyad that we believe the midwife. But Lezami says a little different. If she was stationed in her place, which, as the Gemara is going to shortly explain, she didn't even turn her face around, then she's believed. But if not, if she turned her face away, in the menace, if she turned towards the table to get the thing, to measure, to weigh, whatever, should not believe. So what's in between the two of them? The difference is, if the lady didn't even leave the room, she just turned her face away for a second, when these triplets are coming out, she's not going to be believed anymore to say who's the firstborn. Now, what's the third example? What's the example of one woman exempting the other women, and it's only right away that she's believed? The time we learn the Mishnah Masechet is Nida. There are three women that were sleeping in one bed. Explains that they were literally interconnected. So they're one. There's a small little 32-inch bed, whatever it is. The three women are laying on the same bed. Okay. You find blood beneath one of them. So that's the concern for Thomas Nida, that the woman was menstruating. Allah is kulun tameis. The old can be considered as tummy. We don't know who the dam was from. But if Badka Achas men benimtzes tamei, let's say one of them did a bedika, she did an internal examination, and she finds that she has hard period, she finds dam. So he tamei b'kol tahavas. So she'll be tamei because we found the source. The rest will be tar. On that, Rav Chizdi says, but this is only like we said miyad. Shabbat ka'asma kishir veses, that she went and she checked herself right after it was found. As the Gemara Nida Daf Yudalma Beis explains, the shir veses is that the bedika cloth, which is what she wipes her with, was right there. And the only thing she was lacking was to do an immediate wipe. That is, we'll say, oh, it's from her. But otherwise, if it's not miyad, then we don't know, because maybe she got a period afterwards, and that won't prove it that the dam was found was from her. Now, related idea regarding one of the three cases, the midwife is believed to say, if let's say there were many women giving birth in the same ward, you had the wife of a Kohen, of a Levi, of a Nasan, and a Mamzer, and maybe the lights went out, or whatever it is, or it was in the maternity ward, in the nursery. So the midwife is believed to say, Ze Kohen, Ze Levi, Ze Nasan, Ze Mamzer. She's believed to say which baby is which. So it says the Brisa B'Medvam, when we say this, only if there was no contesting on the child to say that this is the son of the woman, of the wife of the Mamzer. But if let's say there's rumors going around, then she's not believed. Sigma says, what do you mean? What type of rumor? What type of contesting? If you're saying one person is saying this, But from Rabbi Yochanan, it says in general, in irpachas mishnayim, we don't consider the contesting of less than 2 people. Say yeah, you have to say it's talking about that 2 people are contesting. Then we won't believe her. If not, you want to say another pshat. We can say even 1 person contesting. But when would Rabbi Yochanan say that we don't consider contesting less than 2 people? That's when we have a presumption of validity that we had a chazaka, we had a presumed status of this that's kosher. You cannot be ma'ar less than 2. But when you never knew to the people who is the kosher one, we never ever removed any one of the children out of the suffix, because these babies are new and it might have been from the Isha's mamzer. So even 1 person would be believed to contest, and therefore we would not necessarily believe the chaya, the midwife, and then you could even say ir the chad would be in there. I think to end time.